चलो. Yes, sir. Start. Okay. Welcome back, class. All right. So we're dealing with the questions about tribunals we have finished. Okay. Now I wanted to just kind of make an understanding of the subject of accountability a little bit. Okay. And in accountability, what I wanted to cover was, in fact, let me come back to accountability a little later on. Let me just do one particular aspect of coverage with regard to um, welfare schemes. Right? This is a little bit of a over due topic which I wanted to pay some detailed attention to. So by the time we have some time left in the class, we'll do welfare schemes. Otherwise, we'll organize another session to cover it up completely. Whatever is remaining, we'll take another session somewhere or the other. Okay. So just to kind of address Kaushik's question, because it's kind of stuck in my mind now, majority. I just take 5 minutes to take it, but I'm just little stand for time because we have to cover governance in that sense. But I'll take a question about majority. All right, come on. Okay, here is the point about voting. Okay, now I'm going to just briefly make the point, about what is this idea about voting. It says voting in houses, power of houses to act notwithstanding vacancies and quorum. Okay, now this is the part that we're going to read. Save as otherwise provided in this constitution. Okay, first let's take a look at this sentence. Save as otherwise provided in this constitution. All questions at any sitting of either house or joint sitting of the houses shall be determined by a majority of votes of the members present and voting, other than the speaker or the person acting as a chairman or speaker. Okay, so first take a look at the first sentence that I've highlighted over here. Save as otherwise provided in this constitution. Okay, it means that if it is otherwise provided in this constitution, then that will apply. All questions at any sitting of either house or joint sitting of the houses shall be determined by a majority of votes of the members present and voting. Okay, let me break it down for you. Article 100 says that if it is not provided, let me just put it out properly, until it is provided specifically, or what you can say specially, the majority needed to pass a bill in each house must be a simple majority, what is called basically 50% plus 1 of present in voting. Okay, please take a look at what I've written over here. We have Article 100, which says until it is provided specifically or specially, all bills should be passed by a simple majority, which is 50% plus 1 of the members present and voting in both the houses. Now, what it means is, for example, let's say, if you take a look at, let's say, just very simply, if you take a look at Article 114 of the Constitution, Article 114 talks about an appropriation bill, right? Article 114 talks about an appropriation bill. Now, when you say that an appropriation bill has to be passed by the parliament, but it is not mentioned in Article 114 what majority is required to pass the bill. So, in all those articles of the Constitution where it is not mentioned what majority is required to pass them, this kind of a general rule will apply. You see the point? Let me repeat it again. What I'm trying to say is that in all conditions, when you have, let's say, a act or a bill which has been positioned, which does not say what amount of majority is required to pass that act or bill, this simple rule will apply. It's like a generic rule which will apply wherever it is not specifically mentioned. But it will not apply where it is specifically mentioned. So, for example, in Article 368 of the Constitution, you have a special mention of the majority it will take to pass the Constitution Amendment Act. You see, in Article 368, it is given that a bill shall be passed by the majority of the total membership of the House and the 2/3 of the members present and voting. So, this is specifically mentioned. You get the point? So, this is the difference between a simple majority and a special majority. Wherever it is specifically mentioned under the article, the amount of the percentage of votes which have to be given to pass it, you see the specific majority. The term specific over here is not one single mathematical assertion of a particular number. You can have different specific majorities. Okay, one where you can have 2/3 of the members present of the voting, 2/3 of the membership of the House, etc., etc. But the point about specific majority or special majority is that it is specifically mentioned in that article as to the amount of votes it will require for that to be passed. That is why it is called a special majority, as opposed to what is the simple majority. Wherever it is not mentioned, this percentage of voting will be counted. Right now, you have to do one simple thing. Take a look at all the articles of the Constitution which are passing a bill, etc. Wherever there is a resolution, motion, bill, enactment, whatever is being passed by the Parliament, see if it is mentioned that this bill or this provision can be enacted by the majority which is given in that particular article only. For example, in Article 368, it is given you require 2/3 of the majority of the what you call total membership of the House and 2/3 of the members present and voting. That's given over there, right? So it's a special majority. If the numerics around it is not given in the Constitution directly, then Article 100 will apply to it. So that's the whole point. You see, save as otherwise provided in this Constitution. So if it is otherwise provided, which means Article 368 it is otherwise provided, it means that this kind of a situation creates a simple and a special majority. So I will not go to all the charts of what is special and simple, but there are many kind of specific majorities, but the conceptual difference is that simple majority applies to every article which does not have the version of a specification. That's it. And to everything else, you have a specific majority as mentioned under that article. Okay, Kaushik? Does that make sense? Am I able to help you out a little bit with this thing? I can understand if this could have been a conceptual, confusion. Article 100. Okay. Right. Then in addition to that, we are taking a look at today government schemes, right? Let's come back to the point. Welfare schemes. Now, the welfare schemes, this is an important part that we want to, in a way, take a kind of a good understanding of. With regard to all the aspects of the welfare scheme, what we are seeing is that, first of all, we'll take, for example, the first thing is that we'll take a look at the provisions of the Constitution which talk about welfare schemes, right? First, we take a look at Part 4 of the Constitution. But I'm not going to deal with the Part 4 of the Constitution, but just give a kind of a simple contextualizing that the whole concept of a welfare state and the idea of a welfare scheme, it comes from Part 4 of the Constitution. You see, what I mean to say is that the very concept of a welfare state is given in the Constitution with what you call a understanding of the welfare schemes, directive principle of state policy. Okay, right? Then we take a look at what you can call the federal issue about welfare, and in this we take a look at Article 282 of the Constitution. Okay, then we take a look at types of scheme. Right, and in types of schemes we will divide it into two categories. One is known as centrally sponsored schemes, also known as the CSS, okay, and the other is known as the central sector schemes, which are known as the CS, central sector schemes. Okay, we are focusing only on the government of India scheme, not on the government of state scheme. For the UPSC, you don't have to go in that detail about a state subject. Okay, so 1, 2, and 3. Then you have point number 4 with regard to, I will take a little bit of an elaboration about the centrally sponsored schemes. Right, just take a look at how the centrally sponsored schemes in India are divided. These are the aspects of what you generally understand as Yojana. Okay, what we talk about in the centrally sponsored schemes is a concept which is very closely associated to the idea of Yojana. Okay. So in the centrally sponsored schemes, we'll take a look at what are known as core of the core schemes. We'll take a look at core schemes, and we'll take a look at challenges in implementing the schemes, and we'll take a look at reforms with regard to the schemes. Okay, these are the aspects of the welfare scheme chapter that we want to take a look at the point. Okay, yeah, just you can delete this part. That's it. We just write this down as a welfare schemes and their governance. Welfare schemes and their governance. This is the name of the chapter. You can write it as such. Welfare schemes and their governance. Okay, part 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just take this down as a synopsis of this entire chapter. Please take a note of this and then we'll start. Okay, right. So let me just start elaborating upon these parts. You have, for example, the concept of directive principles of state policy, part 4. Now that's where basically the ideas of welfare state are born. Okay, so very simply, what we look at is what is the concept of welfare, right? What is sometimes known as kalyan, right? We have welfare scheme is in Hindi known as a kalyanakari yojana. Okay, so the concept of welfare is a concept which is standing very completely in opposition to what is known as justice. Okay, which means that justice is based upon rights, and justice is something that is supposed to be earned, right? It has a kind of an individualistic element to justice. Welfare, on the other hand, is a kind of a action which elevates a human being to a point where he can demand justice. Okay, so you have to look at humans which don't even have the capacity or the ability developed because of the problems that they're facing in the world are so deep and so you know concentrated that they don't even have the kind of energy it requires to ask for justice. Okay, so it's a kind of a what you can call an upliftment ideology. It's the kind of an ideology which uplifts. And justice, what it does is it empowers, right? So to at least come to the basic points till which a person can ask for justice, you have to look at the upliftment of that person. You have to take the person out of the problems that the person is facing, and that's the whole idea of a welfare state. For example, the whole concept of a welfare state is more or less attached to the Gandhiism of Indian industrial policy, etc. And in directive principle of state policies, you see the inspiration where the state has been given. Right. So when we understand directive principle of state policy, we know for a fact that when state has been given a situation in which the whole concept of what you can call upliftment program is to be developed. Okay, so you have, for example, from article 36 to article 51, you have many articles. For example, some of them talk about welfare schemes or welfare ideas, for example, of equal income between man and women. Okay, then there are ideas with regard to child education, education for children, right? Primary education. Then there are ideas with regard, let's say, for example, animal husbandry to minimize the cruelty on animals, right? Then there are provisions with regard to, let's say, a uniform civil code. Okay, and then there are provisions with regard to what you can call, um, nutrition, that there should be no hunger, right? So you have many important aspects within the directive principle of state policy. For example, one is about healthcare. It talks extensively about healthcare and diet and nutrition, and you have education, right? These are the two important aspects of any country which requires its masses to be uplifted from this entire thing by a kind of a kind of a activity of the state. The state is supposed to spearhead its activity to take the people out of their miseries, out of their problems, out of their concerns. You see the point? That's basically what we're looking at with regard to welfare. And welfare is an inherently social act, right? It is not an individual act. It is to be done to a society. But on the other hand, justice is inherently an individual act, right? Or rights are individual rights. Most of the time, you have rights which are individual rights. Okay, so this kind of a what you can call movement of things is basically what gives the points of the right. The constitution provision for creating any kind of a welfare scheme is given to the state by part 4 of the constitution. Part 4, the way it is named, is known as directive principles. Matlab, it is, these are in the forms of directions which are given to the state to make what you can call state policy, and policy has to do with regard to the upliftment of people from their problems to a point where they can become individuals and be capable of demanding individual rights, right? So it's an act which is done for a society, for a welfare nature of a understanding. So that's the first part. So if a question ever arises that what is the constitutional mandate for the government of India to create welfare schemes, the answer to that is going to be part 4 of the constitution, which is directive principles of state policy. Let me repeat it again. If the question ever arises as to what is the constitutional mandate given to the government of India to create a state policy, the whole idea is going to be about the directive principle state policy welfare scheme. That's the first part that in a way gives us an anchor in the constitution which lays out the duties and responsibility of the state to create policy for the welfare of the society. Okay, let's write down a couple of sentences about this first part. Okay, please put the notes about the first part over there. Start writing part 4 DPSP. Start writing, please. Write down. Part 4 of the Constitution, Part 4 of the Constitution, Article 36 to 51. Part 4 of the Constitution, Article 36 to 51. Part 4 of the Constitution, Article 36 to 51. Deal with directive principles. Deal with directive principles of state policy. Deal with directive principles of state policy, which empower the state, which empower the state, which empower the state to create welfare measures, to create welfare measures slash schemes, to create welfare measures slash schemes for the upliftment, to create welfare measures slash schemes for the upliftment, welfare measures slash schemes for the upliftment of the, empower the state to create welfare measures slash schemes for the upliftment of the, for the upliftment of the society, society at large, and comma, and the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable and marginalized sections of the society. Most vulnerable and marginalized sections of the society. And the most vulnerable and marginalized sections of the society. Right? Full stop. These articles, these articles, these articles, these articles provide, these articles provide principles like, principles like women empowerment, women empowerment, comma, education, comma, healthcare, comma, minority development, minority development, comma, minimum wage, minimum wage, etc. Minimum wage, etc. Minimum wage, etc. Minimum wage, etc. In order to, minimum wage, etc. In order to, minimum wage, etc. In order to enhance social development, in order to enhance social development. Okay, in order to enhance social development. Okay, so that's one point that we have understood and covered very clearly. Right. So the question is, what is the constitutional basis for creating welfare schemes? The answer is directive principles of state policy. Okay. Now let's go back to the second point, which is federal issue about welfare. The question that we're asking is with regard to this is, what is the nature of responsibilities should be shared? Okay, who is within the government? You have obviously the division in India between the central government and the state government. Right. So the question is, who gets the priority for creating, but who gets the responsibility of creating these schemes? Now the central government and the state government in India, both of them have been ordained with their own funds. Right? For example, you have under the central government, you have the Consolidated Fund of India, right? This is the money which has been given to the Consolidated Fund of India to the central government, and this is the money which is given to the states, Consolidated Fund of the states. How are these funds populated? Right? These are the sources of revenue. So the most important source for the money for the government is revenue, which is basically the taxation. Right? So how are the tax, I'm sure that this is already a part of your previous coverages. I'm just going to repeat this. You have Consolidated Fund of India and Consolidated Fund of State. Now, let's say all the matters which are taxed and are listed as subjects of list 1 of the 7th schedule are matters on which the tax money goes to the government of India, which is a central government. Okay, let me repeat it again. All the matters which are listed, all the subjects which are listed in the 7th schedule, when they are taxed, the money for those subjects goes to the consolidated fund of India. Okay, and correspondingly, all the subjects which are listed in list 2 of the 7th schedule, the money from that goes to the consolidated fund of the state. Let's say, for example, I'll take a instance of it. If you have, for example, mines, right? Let's say, for example, mines, which means, let's say, coal mine. Now, if any kind of a tax has been generated by a coal mine, including income tax or the selling of the coal, that tax will go to the government of India, consolidated fund of India. Whether it is in any state, that mine is physically located in any state, that fact that the government of India is going to get the tax in its consolidated fund from the money that has been earned by that mine, right? The tax which has been paid by the activity over that mine. Clear? So that comes under the consolidated fund of India, right? Let's say, for example, fisheries, which is a state subject. Okay, with regard to fisheries, what you are looking at is the fact that the government of India, with regard to fisheries, what we are looking at is the fact that the government of India is not going to take anything which is taxed in fish. The particular state, let's say, for example, if you have the state of Kerala, which has been involved in the production of fishes, the tax from this is going to come to the state government. So this is how the taxation distribution has been divided between them, and that is how both the government of India and the government of the states get their money. Okay, and then you have a kind of a more complicated arrangement. In, let's say, for example, all the money which is taken by the government of India, right, under the consolidated fund of India, has to be then divided. Like, let's say, for example, I'll make a thing about this very simply. This is all the money which has been taken by the government of India. Okay. Now, what will happen is, let's say, for example, this is the money which has come in the consolidated fund of India. What will happen is that this money, let's say, for example, if it is 100 units, let's say this is 100 rupees. This money is going to be divided into these categories. First, it will be divided horizontally. Okay, this is known as horizontal devolution. Okay, this money is going to be divided horizontally, and a share of this money is going to be retained by the government of India. Okay, so this share, this share which I'm marking over here, this is going to be retained by the government of India. Okay, this is a share of the government of India. This is central government. Okay, and the remaining share is going to be marked with the government of the states. Okay. This share is going to be marked with the government of the states. This is known as horizontal devolution. Okay. So this is divided into two shares. The part which is given in pink is given to the government of India, and the part which is given in blue is now given to all the states. But this has to be taken out for the states. Okay, and this has to be done. This kind of a devolution has to be done on the recommendations of the Finance Commission. Okay, this has to be done on the recommendations of the Finance Commission. The respective article for this are Article 270, Article 280, and Article 281. The job of the Finance Commission is to ensure that the money which is taken by the government of India is further categorized into two parts: money which is retained with the government of India and money which is divided between the states or given to the states. Okay, and this kind of a formula for dividing this kind of a money is given out by the Finance Commission, right? And this kind of an activity is known as a horizontal devolution. Clear? Right? Now, but there's one more part to this entire story. That part is that the money of the states is further divided to create separate areas for states. Okay, so for example, this is divided into this part. Okay, then it is divided into this part. Then let's say it is divided into this part. Then it is divided into this part. Okay, so what you are basically looking at is the fact that this entire pool of the state share is divided into different states itself. Okay, so for example, here you have the state of Kerala, which gets the money. Okay, then here you have the state of, let's say, Andhra Pradesh, which gets the money. Then here you have the state of Uttar Pradesh, which gets the money. Then here you have the state of West Bengal, which gets the money. Okay, this kind of a what you can call devolution between the states is also a part of the recommendations of the Finance Commission. Okay, sorry, I just kind of made a mistake over here. This is known as vertical devolution. Yeah, this part that the no, it's a vertical here. This part is known as vertical devolution, the devolution between the government of India and the state governments. And this part, to divide the state pool within the categories of states, within different states, is known as horizontal devolution. Right? And these mechanics work together to create a structure of the devolution of funds between the government of India and the government of and the states, and then among the government of the states. Right? So eventually what is achieved by the end of this process is the fact that the central government of India, the CFI, ends up giving a lot of money from itself to the states. You see? So there are two ways of which states are going to earn revenue. One is a direct way of earning the revenue, which is that they collect their own taxes from the subjects mentioned in list 2 of the 7th schedule. But second is they also, under the recommendations of the Finance Commission, get the money to do their get the money from the Consolidated Fund of India, right? But this is done very formal. For example, you have a state which isn't required of a lot of money for spending on healthcare or education or child nutrition or child mortality or hygiene. That state may not have enough funds from itself, okay, to do it, but its own taxes would not be enough for that state to carry out those schemes in that order. So what it has to do is the Finance Commission, looking at the problem of that state, looking at the nature of that state, looking at the issues of that state, will recommend it to the government of India to transfer a certain amount to that state, and that is basically what is known as a vertical devolution of amounts, right? So the government of India takes the money and puts it to the hand of the state, and the state thus has a activity by which it can replenish its funds. Okay, you get the point, right? So this is basically the question about how does the money come? What is the way in which the central government and the state governments have a kind of a money distribution between these two? Right, so I'm just giving you a reference of this, though this is supposed to be a part of the polity fiscal federalism part. I'm just giving you kind of a revision of this. You have to read Article 270, Article 280, 281 with regard to Finance Commission, and all of these things will be clarified to you by reading that article. If you have your understanding, you can take this diagram down with regard to how the money or the finances are available with both the state government and the central government to pay for the welfare schemes which are coming under these things. Okay, right? Okay. Okay, now we come to the next part, which is Article 282. Article 282 of the Constitution. We are still dealing the second aspect, which is regarding the fiscal issues and the fiscal nature, right? The question that you're asking is about fiscal federalism and centrally sponsored schemes. I'm just developing a background for that understanding only. So I'm coming to that, don't worry. So if you look at a question, the Constitution of India, I want you to take a look at Article 282 of the Constitution. Please take a look at Article 282 of the Constitution and see if you can get a sense of what the article is trying to say. Article 282 of the Constitution. Want to take a look at it and take a sense of what we are trying to do it over here. What does Article 282 state? Article 282 states that the union or the state may make any grants for any public purpose, notwithstanding that the purpose is not the one with respect to which parliament or the legislature of the state, as the case may be, may make laws. Okay. Again, please read this once more and then I'll decode it for you. Just once try to give a reading to this and then I will try to decode it for you. Now what this says is basically simply this, Article 282. What Article 282 states is that whether, let's say for example, you said take a look at education. Okay. Now it says that, let's assume for example, let's forget education. Let's take X. X is a subject matter. Let's say for example fisheries. Fisheries is a subject matter which is mentioned in the state list of the 7th schedule, which means that it is a subject matter which comes under the control of the states. Right? Fisheries as a subject matter is mentioned under the state list of the 7th schedule. Okay. Now let's say what Article 282 says is that if the central government wants, central government can make grants, or they can take a fund. Let's say for example, it can make a fund for creating something called a blue revolution in the country. Blue revolution is with regard to the revolution in fisheries. You see the point? Article 282 says a central government, if it wants, it can take the money to create a blue revolution in the country. The question is, how is it possible? Why is it kind of, what makes that possibility come out, right? And that the answer to that is that the state list and the central list do not hold into account when it comes to grants made for public purposes, which means any government can make any grant for any public purpose, notwithstanding the fact that they don't have the law making authority over that subject. You see, this is what Article 282 suggests. Right? The direct impact of this is that the state government and the central government don't exercise the discipline which is given under the 7th schedule to make two lists, the union list and the state list. You see the point? The state government and the central government don't have to exercise the discipline with regard to the union state list and state list while making a grant for a public purpose. That is what is given in Article 282. So what it means is that even if fisheries is a state subject, the central government can make a policy or a scheme called Blue Revolution, in which it can invest and create the development of the subject matter of fisheries. Right? This is the point about Article 282. You see, with the explanation that we have discussed, please take a look at Article 282 once again. Just take a look at this properly. What is given under Article 282, please take a look at it properly. The union or a state may make any grants for any public purpose, notwithstanding that the purpose is not one with respect to which Parliament or the legislature of the state, as the case may be, make laws. Right? That is what, for example, enables the central government to have a scheme called the Blue Revolution, which is with regard to fisheries, even when the fisheries is a state subject. Right? That's the first part. Now, first we understand this part, right? I think with regard to this part, we have covered both the ideas that I wanted to mention properly. Okay, this is what I wanted to mention in these two aspects. Part one, the first part, and the second part that we have covered over here. Okay, let's just try to note it down, and then I'll quickly move to the next two parts. Okay, please put the heading federal issue about uh, of about welfare under Article 282 and Article 282. Write down federal issue about welfare, Article 282. And this is this is I am giving a point over here, but this is a point of a huge amount of contestation. There's a lot of controversy around this article, which I will introduce. But for now, just write down a brief description. Okay. Within this point, you can divide the points into two parts. Point number A, you can write. Point number A, you can write over here. Point number A, write down. The revenue, the revenue generated by the center and the states. The revenue generated by the center and the states. The revenue generated by the center and the states. By the center and the states. The revenue generated by the center and the states. Center and the states. The revenue generated by the center and the states according to their respective subjects in the 7th schedule. According to their respective subjects in the 7th schedule. According to their respective subjects in the 7th schedule. According to their respective subjects in the 7th schedule. Respective subjects in the 7th schedule is respectively accounted to the Consolidated Fund of India, CFI, and the Consolidated Fund of States, and the Consolidated Fund of the concerned state, and the Consolidated Fund of the concerned state. Full stop. In addition to this process, full stop. In addition to this process, in addition to this process, in addition to this process, the Constitution provides under Article 270, Constitution provides under Article 270 vertical devolution of finances, vertical devolution of finances, vertical devolution of finances, vertical devolution of finances from vertical devolution of finances from the center to the states. Vertical devolution of finances from the center to the states. Vertical devolution of finances from the center to the states. From the center to the states. And horizontal devolution. And the horizontal devolution of the finances among the states. And horizontal devolution of such finances, horizontal devolution of such finances among the states. 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 Full stop. Okay, paragraph change, write down. Article 280 and 281. Article 280 and 281 provide for the Finance Commission. Article 280 and 281 provide for the Finance Commission provide for the Finance Commission. Article 280 and 281 provide for the Finance Commission to recommend the formula to the central government. Sorry, to recommend, not the formula, to recommend such devolution to the central government. Keeping the spirit of federalism. Keeping the spirit of federalism. Keeping the spirit of federalism and an overall development. Federalism and an overall development. Keeping the spirit of federalism and an overall development. Keeping the spirit of federalism and an overall development of the nation. Of the nation. Full stop. Of the nation. Full stop. Thus are procured the finances. Thus are procured the finances by. Thus, comma, are procured. Thus are procured the finances by the central and state governments. Thus are procured the finances by the central and state governments to. Thus are procured the finances by the central and state governments to. Thus are procured the finances by the central and the state governments to fund their welfare efforts. To fund their welfare efforts. To fund their welfare efforts, right? So we are basically getting a sense of the question and answer it, that how do these respective governments get the money from where they are getting it, right? So we have answered the question about where do they get the money. Next question is, how can they spend the money? Right, that's the next question. But what are the ways and conditions and obligations and responsibilities and powers by which they can spend this kind of a money? That is where you put point number 2. So point number B. Okay, and write down about Article 282. You put point number B and write about Article 282. Point number B, Article 282. Article 282. Write down. Point number B under Article 282. You see the point over here, right? Let's just make a note of this. The general scheme of the Constitution, The general scheme of the Constitution allows for law making and executive domains of the center and the states. Law making and executive domain of the center and the states. Of the center and states. Exclusively on the basis of the 7th schedule. Exclusively on the basis of the 7th schedule, comma, exclusively on the basis of the 7th schedule, comma, exclusively on the basis of the 7th schedule, comma, which empowers the center and the states, to exercise their general powers, which empowers the center and the state to exercise their general powers exclusively on these matters, exclusively on these subjects, exclusively on these subjects. Exclusively on these subjects. Okay? Exclusively on these subjects. Full stop. Paragraph change. However, with regard to welfare, comma, Article 282 has been specifically Article 282 has been specifically, or in fact, sorry, Article 282 has specifically, don't write the middle part, has specifically, Article 282 has specifically Article 282 has specifically provided that the state or the center, the center or the state can make grants for public purposes. Put it in apostrophe. The center or the state can make grants for public purposes. Make grants for public purposes. Center of the state can make grants for public purposes on any subject matter. Notwithstanding the 7th schedule. On any subject matter notwithstanding the 7th schedule. Notwithstanding the 7th schedule. Full stop. Next paragraph. Any subject matter notwithstanding the 7th schedule. Full stop. Next paragraph. This explains why the central government can create welfare schemes like the Blue Revolution, can create welfare schemes like the Blue Revolution, despite fisheries being a state subject. Welfare schemes like Blue Revolution, despite fisheries despite fisheries being a state subject. Despite fisheries being a state subject. Full stop. Okay. Biswajit says the central government is bound to follow the finance commission recommendations. Well, no, the concept of recommendations itself means that it is what you can call, you know, not binding in nature. Article 281 gives you the concept of what it is happening, right? So I'm sure you can refer to your polity notes on article 281 to look at the answer properly, but a simple answer to your question is no, it is not bound. But there are political sanctions if they don't do it. There are problems which can arise for the central government if they don't do it that easily, right? That's kind of a there. Okay. So you have Article 282, which has been covered over here, and I kind of make a point about what we are taking a look at. Okay. Now let me come to the third point. Now you see what this means is this, that generally the framework which the central government had adopted was this. You see, for example, let's talk about this kind of a framework which the central government had adopted with regard to welfare schemes in India. You had the Finance Commission, which would allow the money to come to the central government and to the state government. Okay, let's say, for example, you're dealing with a particular matter in which you have the central government and you have the state of West Bengal. Right now, the state of West Bengal, let's say, has a problem with regard to a child nutrition. Right, this is a problem. So, how do we tackle this problem as the government of India? Is a question that we ask. The Finance Commission will take this money from the central government and give it to the state government by the devolution that we have taken out. Now, what will happen is, regardless of nutrition or health care being a part of the state subject, the central government, what it can do is, it can create a scheme. Okay, please take a look at this carefully. We are looking at the construction of scheme. In this scheme, what the central government can do is, let's say, for example, the total budget according to the central government for creating a kind of a scheme for getting rid of child nutrition in the state of West Bengal is, let's say, 50 crore. This is the budget. This is the number which has been taken out. Okay, and by the way, this budget and this scheming, all this scheming was done by another organization which was known as the Planning Commission. Okay, this is not a constitutional body, this is not even a statutory body, it is a non-statutory body which was created by a cabinet resolution. The Planning Commission, so money would be given by the Finance Commission and Planning Commission would use, they would understand how that money has to be used. Okay, and that Planning Commission would create a plan. So they have, let's say, for example, decided that 50 CR is a total amount of money it would require to deal with child nutrition in West Bengal in 1 year. So what they would do is, the central government would create a scheme, and in that scheme it will put 25 CR from itself, right? And then it will tell the state government of West Bengal to put the remaining 25 CR. Okay, this is the kind of mathematics that would happen. 50-50. Central government would put 25 CR and it would ask the state government to put 25 CR from its own budget, and this will become a kind of a compounded corpus of 50 CR, and this 50 CR would then be subjected to a planning by the Planning Commission, right? The whole amount of money once understood this is determined by the central government. The planning commission only determines what kind of money has to be given by the state, and the state has to give that money. State cannot not give that money. It cannot refuse from giving that money. Okay, so it has to create a corpus of 50 cr, the planning commission, and then it realizes what it can do. So it creates a plan to, you know, it creates a plan to deal with child nutrition with the money which has been collected over here, right? And this kind of a scheme structure came to be known by the concept of centrally sponsored schemes. This is what is the concept of a centrally sponsored scheme. I've created a little bit of a background for you to understand the CSS properly. You see, so what you see over here is that you have the finance commission which is giving the money, and then the planning commission is ascertaining what kind of money is needed, asking the finance commission, both of them talking with each other, and then they say 50 crore rupees is needed to file child nutrition in Bengal. So what they would do is they would take 25 crore from the Consolidated Fund of India, and they will ask the state of West Bengal to give the remaining 25 crore, and with a combination of 25 crore from both the sides, they will create a scheme worth 50 crore, which is going to be called a centrally sponsored scheme. And that centrally sponsored scheme is made and planned completely to the last micro detailed by the planning commission. And that centrally sponsored scheme works in a proper centralized manner, right? So you obviously understand the concept of sponsorship. Sponsorship meaning that they are giving some money out of it. Some money has to be given to the government, has to be given by the government of India, and then the rest of the money has to be given by the state government. Okay, and also what it means to have a centrally sponsored scheme means that the administration of this scheme is going to be in a centralized manner. So for example, you see, we take a look at centralization, which means, let's say, this is the government of India at the center, New Delhi. Okay, it will give 25 CR from its own pocket, will collect 25 CR from the state, and for both these monies, it will develop a plan. The planning commission would develop a plan, and then it would give this plan only for implementation to the state government. The only responsibility of the chief minister of the state and the entire public administration of the state is to implement this plan, not to think about this plan, not to improvise upon this plan, not to propose a different plan, but purely implementation of this plan is something that happened, right? This kind of a framework is known as a centrally sponsored scheme. I hope I'm getting a sense of what I'm trying to build up for you. I'm trying to spend as much intensity in making sure that you understand these concepts properly as to what is a centrally sponsored scheme. Clear? Right? And the other kind of scheme, the other topic of scheme, which is known as a central sector scheme. A central sector scheme is distinct from the centrally sponsored scheme. In a central sector scheme, let me repeat it again, a centrally sponsored scheme is one scheme, then you have a central sector scheme, and a central sector scheme is distinct from a centrally sponsored scheme. Now, what does it mean? What it means is that this scheme is only made by the union government on the subjects which are mentioned in the union list, right? And they are fully funded and planned by the union government. You see the point? That they are fully funded. Your central sector scheme, and central sector scheme is in the union list, and within the union list, they are fully funded and planned by the government of India. That's a central sector scheme. These are the two ways in which schemes can be understood. One, you have the concept of the centrally sponsored scheme, which I've elaborated over here, and the other is the concept of central sector schemes. These are over here. This is how the money and the structuring of the welfare schemes in India has been structurally produced before you. I hope you get a sense of what I'm trying to talk about here. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now the question that you were asking before was, Nimai had a question. Centrally sponsored schemes hamper cooperative federalism, right? As it turned out to be the case, there were problems, huge problems with the centrally sponsored scheme. But this concept itself was very problematic. Number one, for example, you have, let's say, one political party in this in the union government, and you have another political party in the state of West Bengal, right? Now, what they basically do is this: let's say the union government makes a scheme, and it says that the government of India is going to put 25 CR, government of Bengal is going to put 25 CR, make it a 50 CR scheme. Plan it all exclusively and only leave the implementation of the scheme to the government of West Bengal. And then brand the scheme as being taken by the government of India alone, right? So, for example, you have the Prime Minister of India who has branded that everything under the scheme has been done by the government of India, right? To which the states feel cheated out, and also the states feel that they have some inputs that they want to give with regard to planning. Maybe they understand what are the local conditions of their areas better. For example, different states can have different reasons for child malnutrition. State of Rajasthan may have a different reason for child malnutrition. State of Bengal may have a different reason for child malnutrition. But a centralized structure of scheme being imposed upon every state without understanding the local conditions of that state does leave the scheme to be a little bit redundant, and add to that the politics of it. For example, in Delhi, this kind of a thing happens, and you know for a fact. So, what happens is that state of West Bengal, you see, for example, the government of West Bengal will have its own healthcare scheme, right? Let's say, you know for a fact, being from this government of, the state of West Bengal, there is a scheme called Ayushman Bharat scheme, which is a centrally sponsored scheme, in which the government of India has to give 70 and the state governments have to give 30. This is the distinction between these two schemes, these two governments, right? Now, what happens is that if Ayushman Bharat is there in state of West Bengal, it is being projected as a scheme created by the Prime Minister of India, and then of course it has some areas in which it would want to take some political gain. Okay. On the other hand, the West Bengal government itself will create another healthcare scheme. I'm not sure what the healthcare scheme in West Bengal is. Can you tell me what it is? What is the healthcare scheme in West Bengal created by the government? And now what happens is that both these schemes start competing with each other, right? So you have 50 CR over here and you have 25 CR over here. And rather than complementing each other, they are crossing each other out. You see the point? But the 50 CR and 25 CR are competing with each other. They are trying to take, let's say for example, you have, this is the mass of people who need healthcare in the state of West Bengal. You have 50 CR coming from the government of India, you have 25 CR coming from the government of West Bengal, right? Now what they do is, both of them try to take the entire charge of the mass, that we will give you all healthcare, don't go to them. We will give you all healthcare, don't go to them. Ideally, what should happen is that they should come together and create a big corpus and create a kind of a structure. But this is the government money. This is the money of the taxpayers only, which is acting in a competitive way, which is acting in a kind of a rival way, which is not letting any actuality happen. Recently, for example, the government, and I know for a fact that the state of West Bengal has not implemented Ayushman Bharat. It is running with its own, government scheme, the state of West Bengal healthcare scheme. Can you tell me the name of it? What is it, the name? Yeah, Swasthya Sathi scheme, right? But you know for a fact that the Ayushman Bharat scheme is not found in any of the government hospitals in West Bengal because they are not implementing it, right? So the problem is that you are still taking the money from the taxpayers and making that money of the taxpayers compete with each other. You see the point? So these, and there are many. I hope I understand. In I kind of elaborate to you why this is a problem for cooperative federalism, right? Nima, you had a question about this. You kind of have an understanding of why I would give an answer like this: cooperative federalism, as to why this kind of a schematizing is not in good stead with cooperative federalism. Because rather than cooperating, rather than making 50 and 25 CR come together, which would be cooperation, you are making 50 and 25 CR compete with each other, and they're bringing each other down. And the government, the people who kind of deserve kind of a activities from this kind of a situation where they're getting paying taxes and they deserve public benefits, etc., they are not getting any of these returns, and a whole politicizing of it is happening. Delhi government creates a healthcare scheme. Delhi chief minister tells the constituency of Delhi that my healthcare scheme is better than the Ayushman Bharat scheme, right? My scheme is what is better, for example, let's say. You see, this is a kind of talking. Now, what you have to look at is, this is one money competing against another money which is paid by the taxpayers. Right? And therefore, this whole idea about this not being completely with regard to the cooperative federalism. Right? So, you have a kind of a system in which this structure is working out. Take. Now, when we understood, for example, the difference between centrally sponsored schemes and central sector schemes, let me give you a detailed understanding of what are these schemes. In reality, the names of these schemes. We are not obviously going to cover the individual schemes in a class of governance, that is a part of current affairs. But I'll create a basic structure to give you the name of certain important schemes and how they are divided. Okay, this take a look at this. These are what are known as the centrally sponsored schemes. Okay, I'm taking this document from the 2023-24 budget. Okay, now don't pay attention to the technicalities of it, and if you want, you can, right? How much money has been allotted to whom, etc., etc. But these are the what you can call 6 core of the core schemes. Okay, core of the core schemes. Just take a look at this. These are the 6 core of the core schemes, which are known as as I told you, that centrally sponsored schemes are divided into 2 categories: core schemes and core of the core schemes, and these are the 6 core of the core schemes. Just take a look at them, get the name of them properly. If you want, you can take a note of them also, because these are the schemes that you may have in your question paper sometimes in the prelims examination. Okay, within centrally sponsored schemes, the first categorization is core of the core schemes. Right, so these are the core of the core schemes, and what you have is other parts which are known as the core schemes, which are plethoric in number. Okay, take a look at this. This is a kind of a category. I'll explain to you what is the basis of classifying any scheme as a core scheme or a core of a core scheme. Okay, so these are the core schemes. Hmm. Right, you can take a look at this document. This is the budget document with regard to centrally sponsored schemes. Right, and then now you can take a look at what are the central sector schemes. These are the central sector schemes. As I gave you the definition of these central sector schemes, are schemes which are created only from the union subject and are fully planned and funded by the government of India. Okay, these are not created on the state subjects at all. Okay, right, so this is a basic structuring and the categorization of this, right? So you kind of have a understanding. Now I can at this point of time give you a simple tip as to what schemes you have to read, because they will technically fall under the part of your current affair coverage. Last year there was a question on in the UPSC about a scheme called the Gati Shakti Yojana. Gati Shakti Yojana. Okay, this is a question that came last year. But the one question that comes from scheme in the UPSC paper, this was a question last year, Gati Shakti Yojana. And I'll tell you why this was in news last year. Because the Gati Shakti Yojana was implemented only last year. What I mean to say is that the simple formula that you can, apply to study the schemes are is a formula that the schemes which have in the newspaper in terms of I'll tell you the criterias. Okay, for example, see, look at this. In 2022 main examination, the question came from this Yojana, Gati Shakti Yojana. And you have, for example, a Hindu editorial which had come in October 2021. So this is October 2021, Gati Shakti Yojana. Okay, so Gati Shakti National Master Plan that was launched in October 13, Prime Minister has expanded on the familiar theme that India's slowing economic growth engine can find renewed momentum through major infrastructure upgrades that will cut logistic costs for industry and raise all-round efficiency. You had a editorial written on the Gati Shakti Yojana in October 2021, and you had a question from the Gati Shakti Yojana in 2022. So my advice to you is that while you're preparing to write for your schemes, whether prepare for the schemes, the question that you're asking, which schemes should you read? Three ways in which you can identify the schemes that will specifically come in the question, right? Number one, the scheme has to be freshly introduced. Okay, but what you have to find out is that the scheme must be freshly introduced. Okay, number one. Okay. Number two, the scheme must have seen a massive budget uprise, which means that a lot of funds must have been allocated to an already existing scheme. Let's say if Narega had funds over here in 2020 to 23, in the next budget it comes over here. So much more money is given to Narega all of a sudden, then the schemes become relevant in the current affairs. Okay, and then the third part is that you have massive cuts in some scheme, that a lot of money has been taken out of that scheme. The government is trying to, in a way, not put too much money in the scheme, it is trying to demote the scheme. These are the three criteria which you can apply with regard to studying the schemes which are going to be there, right? So what you have to do is you have to scan the newspapers, and this is supposed to be the, if you have created your newspaper articles with regard to last year's current affairs, go to those notes and editorials and look at all the schemes and divide them into these three categories. They are freshly introduced, like the Gati Shakti Yojana. After the budget, some money has been given to some scheme or some money has been taken out of some scheme. These are the three highlights that make news, and these are exactly the ones that you can zero down upon with regard to the possible questions asked from schemes. Okay, so this is what we are in a way able to understand with regard to the good aspects of what the schemes that you can read. Clear? Tick. All right. I remember showing you this page when we were dealing with the governance and civil society participation and everything. And this is how, for example, you have the schemes. Schemes expenditure form a sizable proportion of the total expenditure of the central government and is segregated into two categories: centrally sponsored schemes and central sector schemes. Right. So if you go on this website, openbudgets.in, you can actually play along with these schemes very properly. Right. So for example, you have, these are the schemes. What you see in blue is the schemes. The darker the blue, the more the scheme has been given more money. The darker the red, the more money has been taken out of the scheme. Okay, and you, for example, can divide this into types of scheme. The core schemes, right? These schemes comprise a bulk of the centrally sponsored schemes and entail mandatory fund sharing and implementation by the states. Okay, core of the core schemes, these are part of the centrally sponsored schemes based on social protection and social inclusion and entail fund sharing between the union and the states. And these are the central sector schemes. These are schemes on subjects in the union list of the constitution and are fully funded by the union government and implemented by the same. Okay. So this is basically a simple way of cutting. If you go to this page, openbudgetsindia.org, you can take a look at any of these schemes and find out how much money has been added to each of them and how much money has been taken out of each of them and what is the total size of each of them. It's a beautiful interactive map. You have over here the 6 core of the core schemes that we had taken a look in the budget. Now, this is a result of citizens' participation. This is a result of what we had discussed last time, transparency and accountability, which was brought by democratization of the participation of the citizenry. You see? So that's the point that we are in a way trying to take a look and understanding of in this sense. Clear? Okay. Now just take some, let's go back and make sure that we have all the notes completed for this entire structure of the government schemes. Okay, yeah. So we were at the types of schemes, right? Centrally sponsored schemes and central sector schemes. So we can just write down, put down the third point. Third point, write down types of schemes. Types of schemes. Types of schemes, and write down in this A, centrally sponsored schemes. We'll just write a description of these. Centrally sponsored schemes. Write down. Centrally sponsored schemes. Write down a description of these, please. These are schemes fully planned by the central government. Fully planned by the central government. These are schemes fully planned by the central government and partly funded by the central and partly by the state governments. Partly by the state government. These are schemes fully planned by the central government and partly funded by the central and partly by the state governments. Full stop. They can be divided into two categories. Core of the core schemes. Core of the core schemes. Core of the core schemes and core schemes. Core of the core schemes and core schemes. Core of the core schemes and core schemes. Okay, just change the paragraph and write down. Core of the core schemes comprise of 6 umbrella schemes, which you've taken a note of previously. Core of the core schemes comprise 6 umbrella schemes. Comma. Each of these schemes prescribe specific financial participation by states. Each of these schemes prescribe a specific financial participation by states. A specific financial participation by states. A specific financial participation by states. Full stop. For example, in MGNREGA, MGNREGA, state governments have to incur 25% material expenditure. 25% material expenditure. Okay, so the difference between a core scheme and a core of the core scheme is that for each of the 6 core of the core schemes, you have different formula. For example, in one it can be 80:20, in another it can be 70:30, in another it can be 75:25, in another it can be 9:10, etc. So each of these 6 schemes, the money which is being taken by the central government and the state government are specified separately for each of them. That's why they're called core of the core schemes. That for individual schemes, the percentage of money which has to be put into their accounts has to be is varied across the schemes: 80:20, 70:30, 75:25, 90:10, etc., etc. Right? That's the part that we are taking a understanding of. Then we take a look at the next part. Write down in the same sentence the core schemes. For the core schemes, the funding pattern is 60-40 for states and center and states respectively. It's a kind of a format funding pattern. For any scheme which is called the core scheme, the funding pattern is a clear cut 60:40. In case of core schemes, the funding pattern is a clear cut 60:40. Okay, full stop. But for difficult states, but the states with high problems in terms of logistics, etc., like northeastern states and Himalayan states, it is 90-10. For difficult states, it is 90-10. For difficult states, it is 90:10. 90:10. Okay, you get the point? So this is basically the difference between the core of the core scheme and the core schemes. Now I have already pointed out to you that you have a budget page in which you have given a list of all the schemes. You don't have to read all of them, only read the ones which have been freshly introduced, budget has been spiked, or budget has been taken to a cut down. Only these are going to be the ones from which you have a direct question on the scheme name. Otherwise, an indirect question with regard to the whole idea and structuring of centrally sponsored schemes, etc., etc., that is frequently asked out. Okay. So this is what we have basically taken care of. After that, you can also take a look at, write down in the next paragraph, you can have centrally sponsored schemes, central sector schemes. Just write down a little bit of a understanding of these. What are central sector schemes? So by this kind of a understanding, you have a very clear vision of what is the point about creating schemes which are the structuring of government schemes in India, how it is done. The core basic content of that is covered with you properly in these 4 parts. Write down central sector scheme. Central sector scheme, write down. Point number 1 under this. Yeah, don't write a point number 1, write down. These are schemes fully funded, fully planned. These are schemes fully planned, funded by the central government, by the central government. These are schemes fully planned and funded by the central government, by the central government, and are only made on subjects, and are only made on subjects, and are only made on subjects, are only made on subjects which are which are mentioned in the union list, which are mentioned in the union list of the 7th schedule. Which are mentioned in the union list of the 7th schedule. Full stop. Right. So again, you can take a look at the central sector schemes just by doing a Google central sector schemes budget PDF. You'll find this document. Okay. You get the point? The last point that we are going to take is what is the whole idea of schemes. I think we've overlapped a little bit. Just put a last point over here, point number D, with regard to centrally sponsored schemes. As we have already divided the centrally sponsored schemes into core and core of the core schemes, that part is already covered. So centrally sponsored schemes, for the last point, we just write down challenges and reforms. Okay, so just give a kind of the first subtitle of this is going to be challenges. Challenges, write down. Challenges. These schemes raise a twofold challenge. A twofold challenge. Twofold challenge. One, with regard to the federal nature of Indian polity. With regard to the federal nature of Indian polity. One, with regard to the federal nature of Indian polity. With regard to the federal nature of Indian polity. As the central government, keeps a centralized control over these schemes. Central government keeps a centralized control over these schemes. Central government keeps a centralized control over these schemes. Central government keeps a centralized control over these schemes, leaving little scope for the state governments. Leaving little scope with the state governments. Leaving little scope with the state governments. Leaving little scope with the state governments to provide their inputs. Leaving little scope with the state governments to provide their inputs. Leaving little scope with the state governments to provide their inputs. To provide their inputs, full stop. It also leads to a heavy charge on the consolidated fund of the states. It also leads to a heavy charge on the consolidated fund of the states. It also leads to a heavy charge on the consolidated fund of the states. cutting down their own capacity for welfare, 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 and cutting down their own capacity for welfare, and also 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 creates room for political rivalry, and also creates room for political rivalry and one-upmanship and one-upmanship and one-upmanship between the political parties at the political parties at the center and the state and the state and the state, which proves counterproductive, which proves counterproductive which proves counterproductive from the perspective of the citizen, which proves counterproductive from the perspective of the citizen, which proves counterproductive from the perspective of the citizen who would benefit better by the two governments acting in cooperation than in competition, who would benefit better by the two governments acting in cooperation than in competition. Full stop. Paragraph change. The second challenge the second challenge faced is with regard to the proliferation of the number of schemes, proliferation of the number of schemes by various governments over decades, number of schemes by various governments over decades, comma, sometimes 10 schemes are in operation with regard to the same subject matter, created by different governments, comma. This division of funds without integrated direction, this division of funds without an integrated direction, fails to achieve the critical mass of funds under one objective, critical mass of funds under one objective to deal with the social problem, to deal with the problem, not a social problem, to deal with the problem. Full stop. Okay, so these are the two challenges. The first challenge is the challenge of the federal nature. The second challenge is proliferation. But what I mean by saying proliferation is the fact that this number of schemes are so many, by God, by so many government they have been made, and some scheme has been given 500 rupees, some scheme 1000 rupees, some schemes 10,000 rupees, and they are being there, right? And all of these are moving like a multi-headed hydra in different directions, right? So this kind of a proliferation. Now you see, for example, the let's say if you are spending 100 crore every year for, let's say, education, but the way that you are spending it is under 1,000 schemes. So one has 1 crore, one has 2 crore, one has 3 crore, one has 4 crore, one has 5 crore, right? And this kind of a proliferation, this kind of a multi-headedness of schemes leads is to completely absent with regard to a critical mass. But the better idea would be to consolidate all of these schemes under one head, and that is basically what gave the concept of umbrella schemes, right? So that, all of these schemes which are operating in kind of isolation from each other and sometimes cutting out each other, all of this is money which should be put together under one header and then given a kind of a, larger velocity with each other. They should complement the forces of each other, not work in separation of each other, right? So that is why one of the reforms which has been suggested is with regard to what you can call rationalization of schemes. So you can put the second point, point number B, reforms. Okay, now I'm going to just give you a list of what reforms are and then maybe circulate a draft as to what has to be populated, but more or less they are self-explanatory. Okay, first reform is rationalization, that these schemes have to be cut down in number, only the important ones have to be retained, and a lot of these schemes should be put under one umbrella organization, right? So in fact, the division of schemes between the core of the core and the core schemes is an example of this itself, right? This is an example of rationalization. It has been achieved out of rationalization. If you look at, for example, the core of the core schemes, you see a lot of schemes which have a very generic title to it. Let's say if you take a look at this one, core of the core schemes, you take a look at this one, National Social Assistance Program. Now it has a lot of schemes under it. Okay, let's say umbrella scheme for development of scheduled castes. All the schemes made for scheduled castes are put under one core of the core larger perspective scheme, right? That's one part of rationalization. Second reform which is obviously done is the abolition of the planning commission, and in place of it the creation of the Niti Aayog, right? Instead of the planning commission you have created a body which is known as a Niti Aayog. Now, Niti Aayog is not involved in centralized planning anymore, right? So, this is an example of what you can call a decentralization, that the governments should not be making all the plans from a central authority. They should divulge some plan making abilities to the states, and instead of creating a planning commission like body, you create a think tank which can consult and give supervision and some advice to the states, but doesn't have an objective of binding the states as to what has to be done. Okay, so these are the two reforms that we talk about with regard to the centrally sponsored schemes, right? Let me circulate a draft which has a little bit of a write-up upon the two of them, but more or less you understand they are self-explanatory. Rationalization implies making schemes, trimming the schemes, cutting down the rough edges, making them more sharp, bringing the consolidation together, and the fact that Planning Commission was abolished in 2014, and instead of it you had established the Niti Aayog. Okay, so let me just take a look at a few questions before we leave. Okay, can a state make grant to a public matter which is considered as a residuary item? Can a state make grant to a public? Yes, yes, it can. It can. Residuary meaning concurrent, right? Yes, any government can make any public grant on any public matter. Schedule 7 does not apply at all. Biswajit, sir, can state government change the name of the central government scheme? And if any scheme name changed by state, central stop to sending money to state, is it legally justified? Well, yes, the state government cannot interfere with the central government scheme. It would be a violation of Article 282 of the Constitution. Okay, it is not going to be the case that the state government can interfere. Even to some extent, what the question Nimai is asking is related. Legally speaking, the central government scheme, if it is made, it has to be implemented by the state government. At best, the state government can raise an objection to the fact that it is not going to pay money for it, but it cannot say that it is not going to implement it, because implementation of schemes is directly binding upon the state governments under Article 282 of the Constitution. But the fact that these things happen sometimes for political reasons and no one goes to the Supreme Court is a different question altogether. But if you were to go to the Supreme Court where the state government is not implementing a centrally sponsored scheme, then it is a violation of Article 282 of the Constitution. Yeah, Subrata, that's the same answer. Is binding on the state government. If it comes to implementation, yes, it is binding. If it comes to funding under a centrally sponsored scheme, that is a little debatable. But when it comes to implementing a centrally sponsored scheme, it is binding. Can a state government make grant to another state government under Article 282? Yes, yes, 100%. It can make it under Article 282, but only for a public purpose. Okay, and it has to be defined as a public purpose by some judicial authority. For example, a state government cannot get money from the central government to create a new legislative assembly building because that may not be a part of the public purpose. But it's like extravagant expenditure. But if it is for child malnutrition policies and women infanticide prohibition ideas, etc., then the government can take a look at this. In syllabus of schemes, issue in design and issue in implementation, how many points we should write, so you get a sense of it, right? You have, for example, issue in design is that Article 282 itself is a little bit controversial, right? That's the whole point about what the structuring of Article 282, which gives the central government the power to take a kind of a scheme making activities on the state government. That itself has been raised as a design, and the implementation is the two problems that I have made you write. Number one, politics. Number two, proliferation, right? So these are the issues more or less with regard to design meaning the concept of it is probably, there is a lot of demand in the constitution of, in the constitutional circles, to get Article 282 repealed because it is not serving the purposes of anyone and it is leading to only unnecessarily politics between the central and the state government. That is an issue with design. Issue with implementation are two: politics and proliferation. That these are the two issues, and the reforms which have been initiated against those issues. Okay. State government implemented central government scheme with different name. Well, I think it should be a case of Supreme Court interfering in, but the Supreme Court has a right to enforce this kind of a thing upon the state government to retain the name as given by the central government itself. I think that way. Okay, all right. I think that's our time. Officially, we have about maybe one class worth of material remaining for me to share with you. So we'll have to arrange a way in which we can. You have classes from tomorrow onwards, I understand, but I have about one class worth material that I want to share with you more with regard to CBI, CVC, Lokpal, Lokayat, and NGOs, SHGs, and FCRA, etc. So we'll have to find out a way to adjust that kind of a thing in our schedule. But overall, in the large scheme of things, 95% of the subject matter of governance is complete with you. Whatever documents we have promised to circulate will get to you. I had a very good time dealing with you, and you had a lot of very pertinent and very relevant questions, and I was inspired by looking at your awareness of the current updates, and I am wishing and praying that you have a good session reading for the UPSC, and also you ace in your examinations and crack this exam to become administrators for the government of India. And I hope that the knowledge that we've taken together of governance would be of some help and impact to you while you are discharging your functions and duties. Thank you so much for your time and patience and allowing me to present myself and my ideas before you. Thanks a lot. If you are in yeah, so what one class remaining worth of material, I'll find a way to make sure that I get to you somewhere or the other. With regard to the contact number, if you have queries, you can maybe message me, but I'm just kind of giving you this kind of a thing in advance. I'm a very bad person. I'm not very diligent with messages, etc. But I'll take a look at what I can do with regard to, I'm not very tech savvy in terms of using a mobile phone too often. But this is my mobile number. You can leave me certain messages over here, and we can be in touch if you want some help in solving some questions or answer sometime outside. Okay. Thank you for your time and patience, and I wish you Godspeed for everything that you want to do in the future. Thank you. All the best for the examination coming your way. Thank you.